Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Welcome back to Westminster this Sunday morning. It's a glorious day here, made all the more glorious by being joined by the political editor of The Sun, Tom Newton-Dunn. Cost you 10 quid. Steve Richards, who writes for The Independent, another 10 quid. And Julia Hartley-Brewer, who presents a radio show on Talk Radios. I think 20 quid from you. Job done. Let's take a look at how the new parliamentary arithmetic stacks up after this hung Parliament election result. What will happen in the House of Commons. Now, this is how many MPs each of the parties currently have. 318 for the Conservatives, 262 after they won Kensington for Labour, and the remaining 70 MPs are shared out between another 6 parties and 1 independent. Now, if we assume that the Conservatives and the DUP do reach some sort of deal, they've not done it yet, they're trying to do it, the assumption is they will, we'll see, they'd have a combined total of 328 votes. But remember, Sinn Féin don't take their seats in Westminster. There's 7 of them. We can take them out of the equation. And if we add together all of the remaining parties, that gets to a total of 315. Now, there's also the Speaker, the 3 Deputy Speaker. They're normally balanced from the main parties. And according to convention, the Speakers and the Deputies don't take part in votes. So if we take away the Speaker and his Deputy, this is what we get to. 326 MPs, Conservative DUP, up against all of the others, 313. Look at these figures. So it's going to dominate British politics in the weeks and months ahead. It means the effective working majority for the Conservatives plus the DUP would be 13. Now, Steve, let me be a bit kind of counter-consensus here. 13 is not a lot. It's less than she had before she went to the country. But with sensible and cautious parliamentary management, with 13, maybe it's not as unstable and uncertain as we've all been saying.
The broader context is as unstable as we've all been saying. But in the short term, you haven't interviewed a single Tory who says we want an election this summer or even this autumn.
I wonder why.
I wonder why. Given that, they cannot afford to be defeated continuously in the Commons. So a single question will be posed when Number 10 weakly and pathetically put together the Queen's speech is, can this get through the House of Commons? And they will make sure in advance that it can, because they can't afford for a Queen's speech to be defeated. So in that sense, I think it will carry on for some time, this Parliament, not necessarily Theresa May, because they have no choice but to carry on. In the same way that in the 70s, the Labour government staggered on for years, not because the Commons was stable, but because neither Wilson nor Callaghan wanted to call a general election which they would lose.
Indeed.
And so I think this will carry on. But the broader context is far from stable, and when Brexit legislation comes to the Commons, all hell is going to break loose.
What do you think? Is it a little bit more stable than we've thought?
Well, if you allow for every single, cabinet minister and junior minister having to come back from Brussels during the negotiations for pretty much every single vote, no one's going to be allowed to be in hospital overnight for a
Back to
big
this,
vote.
could be back to these days.
Yeah, I
couldn't
mean,
it?
I think people after a very long and bruising, well, it felt like a very long and bruising campaign for only 7.5 weeks, that everyone's exhausted, and I don't know how long that tallies. I just think the reality is, if Theresa May had any credibility left, if she was seen as somebody who could actually make it through and still be Prime Minister in a year's time and was had the support of her party, then maybe it could limp on. But because she is a dead woman walking, as George Osborne put it this morning, I don't see how it can be sustainable.
Well, she may be walking wounded rather than dead woman walking, as Mr. Osborne has said. You could see with some sensible parliamentary management, and as Steve says, with a Tory MP's desire not to have to go to the country for a while anyway, that although it would be messy, it will be unpredictable at times, it may not be the car crash that lots of us thought it would be. Yes. 24 hours after the result.
Andrew, I hear your counter-intuition. I hear your glass half full. I'm here to tell you that it is totally untrue, I'm afraid. And
good.
the reason
Tell me
is,
why.
so the numbers would dictate you're right, because 13 is one more than the majority of 12 that David Cameron had in 2015. However, this is all about doing a deal with the DUP. This is not a coalition, this is confidence and supply, and a deal with an Ulster party, especially the DUP with their twinges and particular interests, is incredibly volatile and unstable. Remember, all they've agreed to do, or not even quite yet, but they probably will tomorrow, is vote through possibly a Queen's speech and budget matters and confidence motions, and zero else. Therefore, the government has no great majority of 13 to pass a single other piece of legislation, and it is unsustainable. It may last a year, maybe 18 months, while Brexit is underway. Now, Brexit is the crucial factor in all of this, but not much longer.
Well, let it come on to it, because a key player now in Brexit could be the Scottish Conservative leader, Ruth Davidson, who probably was the only Tory that had a decent election result on Thursday night, and she's gathered all these new Tory MPs together. Let's just have a quick look at her with what she calls her new team. Let's see that. So there you are, a visual showing that there are now a lot more Scottish Conservatives than there are pandas in Edinburgh Zoo. Ruth Davidson went on to say, I think what's really clear is that the Conservative Party, having failed to win a majority, now needs to work with others. And that means we can look again at what it is we hope to achieve as we leave the European Union. And I want to be involved in those discussions. Now, she's not even in the Commons, but she wants to be involved. She's in the Scottish Parliament. I can see why she's saying that, but I also heard Dominic Raab tell me earlier he didn't really think they needed to change their Brexit strategy. This could be the return of Tory Euro wars.
Well, of course, it never really went away. The reality is Ruth Davidson is not going to bring down a Tory minority government for that. The reality is 84% of people who voted on Thursday voted for a party, Tory, Labour and UKIP, who accepted the referendum result. It's absolutely categorically stated, different priorities in terms of the deal, but there is no question at all this idea of staying in the single market. That would be great. I'd love to stay in the single market as long as we don't have free movement as a Leave voter. But the reality is that is not on the table. This idea of hard Brexit and soft Brexit does not exist as an option. The only option that exists is leaving the EU, leaving the single market and maintaining control of our borders. That's the only way in which Brexit can meaningfully happen. And any party who's going to try and defy that will be very foolish indeed. Bearing in mind, John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, only today has said quite clearly that we will be leaving the single market if he has anything to do with it.
Does Mrs May have to change her Brexit strategy?
I think one of the reasons why politics is as turbulent as you suggested at the beginning it was, in spite of my view there won't be an early election, is over this. Because if you think about it, like Heath in 1974, Theresa May sought a mandate. Heath, who governs, an early election. She, an early election for my version of Brexit. That was her framing of the election when she called it. She hasn't got it. And therefore, I think her version of Brexit is in real trouble because it's given permission of all those Tory Remainers to come out again and declare that they want, at this point, Julia's quite right, they're not saying end all this, but a different kind of Brexit, which could lead in all kinds of stormy directions.
So on Brexit, perhaps change, you disagree, perhaps not. The manifesto, is that pretty dead in the water now?
The Brexit part of it, I think most of the manifesto is now dead in the water. Fascinatingly, you've just interviewed Graham Brady giving up on grammar schools, pretty much. I mean, he was the absolute cheerleader for the thing, and he's admitted it's all gone. Brexit especially, I mean, Steve's absolutely right. The Prime Minister simply did not win a mandate, as in a majority of constituencies, to deliver her version of Brexit. And whether you agree Brexit should go ahead as Julia wants it or as Steve wants it...
No, as the British people want it.
Well, that's the point. The British people didn't want any definition of Brexit. They've come back and thrown back Theresa May's definition of Brexit by not giving her a majority.
There's nothing.
Anyway, I'm not here to argue. I'm not a Julia or a Steve.
Happened on Thursday,
I'm not going to argue what type of Brexit is. I'm simply saying the first rule of politics, as LBJ famously says, is to learn how to count. Brussels is now no longer negotiating with the Prime Minister. She's negotiating with the House of Commons all over again, which is the precise reason she wanted an election for a big majority.
Is the Sun going to stick with Mrs May or call it to go?
I think we've made our views quite clear on Mrs May already, which is she's on borrowed time. I think personally, and I think the paper agrees, she needs to stay to stabilise the situation, but she cannot fight another general election.
And then she should go, and you think the Sun's view. Okay, I want to move on to the DUP, because the narrative from the left on the DUP is concentrated on their, how can I put it, their unfashionable views on homosexuality or abortion and so on. But I would suggest, Steve, none of these are up for grabs in any deal the Tories are going to do. That's just inconceivable. What hasn't been noticed is that on things like public spending, public sector pay, welfare benefits, given that they represent large numbers of Protestant working class votes, they're to the left of the Tories on these issues.
I think this is a hidden irony of what's happened, because I think you said, and I knew as well, that Philip Hammond wanted an early election. So he was liberated from all the Tory constraints from the 2015 manifesto, so he could do some complicated spending cuts and tax increases and so on. Now he is dependent on a DUP who will impose some of these things. They support the triple lock.
Yes, on pensions.
And that's one example.
They want to keep the winter fuel allowance.
And they want to keep the winter fuel allowance. So ironically, that this early election constrains Philip Hammond more than he was before. And it was called partly, obviously, about Brexit, but to free him up. And he's more trapped than ever. I don't think he will get the triple lock through this House of Commons, and I don't think he will probably try to do so, because they would be defeated.
And since in the election campaign it was on things like welfare and public spending and public sector pay freezes that the Tories were on the wrong end of Labour, they might find these DUP positions now quite convenient.
Yes, indeed. They can just drop everything pretty much. I agree with you. I think they're going to only put in the manifesto, apology in the Queen's speech, what they think they can get through. I think it's going to be about 3 paragraphs long. It's going to be the shortest Queen's speech. I remember some of those Blair Queen speeches. They were just pages and pages and pages. There's going to be barely anything there. Can I just say, though, just one thing in terms of Theresa May staying on? The reality is you have to have someone else who wants to take the job. Not just, of course, Boris Johnson wants a job. Of course, other people want the job. But do they want it right now? Wouldn't they rather see her fail on the Brexit negotiations, fail with the DUP, everything collapses, and then they take over, and they have to go to the country because for the good of the country, not the party. That, I think, is the crucial. It's the timing.
Should we pay a bit more attention to the DUP's economic policies now?
We should pay every bit of attention we have to every minutiae the DUP have said. Their website crashed on Friday morning, as everyone was
all the
busily...
Sun journalists going into it.
Every journalist was logging and thinking, what do these people think about anything?
All
because
right,
we're now going to be held hostage.
We've only got a few votes, say 15 seconds, so to be quick. Will Mrs May still be there by the Tory party conference in early October?
Probably yes.
Yes, but not much beyond.
Yes, but only as a puppet to the cabinet.
3 yeses, but not exactly enthusiastic.
So we're bound to be wrong.